Good afternoon. This is meteorologist Drew Lerner of World Weather Incorporated, and this is your world weather update here for Thursday, July the 30th. Starting off, taking a look at the upper air wind flow pattern for North America, you can clearly see the disorganized ridge of high pressure present today is the reason why it's going to rain this afternoon and tonight in the upper parts of the U.S. Midwest, including the eastern Dakotas and some of the neighboring areas. Now, we are expecting that little area of rain to work its way southeast into the heart of the Midwest. We'll continue to watch that as we go forward through the night tonight and into the day tomorrow. You can see that trough of low pressure just kind of moves from northwest to southeast, and as it does, we will see the rain that's associated with it. And we'll take a look at that shortly. In the meantime, the ridge of high pressure that evolves, or I should say strengthens behind it, is likely to become a fairly significant feature once again, but just for a day or two. The temperatures will soar up into the 90s to over 100 degrees once again in portions of the northern plains, as well as getting up above 90 in parts of the eastern Canada prairies. But you'll notice here there's a trough of low pressure that comes in from the Gulf of Alaska. And as it comes into Canada and goes up over the back side of the ridge of high pressure, there will be some rain and some thunderstorm activity, although there's not a lot of moisture available because, first of all, the system moved through the Midwest is taking a lot of the moisture out of the air with it. And second of all, the ridge that's developing ahead of the trough in Canada is still blocking the moisture flux from the Gulf of America from reaching up into Canada. So there will be some showers and both the Canadian prairies and the northern plains, but it's not going to be meaningful rain. And all this is occurring as we go forward through the weekend and into the early part of next week. This is one of the reasons why we will continue to be concerned about dryness in the southwest prairies and the northwest U.S. plains as we go forward through the first half of this month, or the month of August. All right, as time goes along, that trough of low pressure will work its way into Ontario and Quebec. And behind it will be some dry air and some mild temperatures. And I put that in quotes. We'll have normal temperatures in the prairies for a short period of time. As we move forward into the second week of August, the ridge of high pressure initially is going to be over the Four Corners area in the southwestern United States, limiting the amount of monsoon moisture that will be working its way into the Rocky Mountains. That will likely add to a limited distribution of rain from the Rocky Mountains into the heart of the plains in the Midwest. And for that reason, I do think that dryness is still going to be an issue even beyond this rain event that occurs tonight and tomorrow in the upper Midwest. Now, don't get me wrong, there will be significant rain and there will be relief in some of these dry areas, but more rain will be needed. Now, the GFS model run suggests that one little disturbance after another will move across the upper Midwest and there'll be sufficient follow-up precipitation that everybody will do just fine. I'm not completely convinced that that will be the case, but we'll watch closely. This is the upper air wind flow pattern for Monday, the 10th of August. And you can see that there's a weak ridge of high pressure that extends from the Rocky Mountains up into Canada's prairies once again. And so that will likely add to the limitation in some of the rainfall. And as we go forward into the last days of the second week forecast, which gets us out to mid-August, you can see that the ridge, it just kind of gets a fairly firm a position over Western Canada and the Western United States, and that's going to suppress the rain again. And so, for that reason, as I've stated in past presentations, we're concerned that the dryness in the Southwest prairies and the Northwest plains is going to prevail for a while. And I want to take you back a couple of days. Now, some of you already saw this, but not all of you did. And I want to go over this scenario again. Looks like I didn't open it up here. So let me go grab that real quick and see if we can focus in on that. So this was an assessment that I did on the corn and soybean production areas earlier this week, and I think it's really important. So we're going to look at it real quickly, and then we'll move on. So this just to kind of familiarize yourself with where the corn is produced in the U.S. I just want you to focus on the northern plains and upper Midwest. Everybody is pretty familiar with that area. We're going to be most interested in this particular part of the production region because this is the area that everyone's been talking about that had so much heat and dryness. So in the first half of July, some of that area, which again is this area here that we're talking about, it had some timely rainfall, especially eastern South Dakota and western Minnesota did really well with precipitation in the first half of July. There were some areas in central South Dakota that did not do very well with precipitation, and some areas in northeastern North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota that didn't do very well. And you can see that there's some pockets all the way back into Montana that were kind of dry biased. But in the first half of the month of July, there were not many excessively hot days. These are the highest temperatures reported during those 2 weeks. And I want you just to kind of focus in for just a moment on this particular area. The area where the most important corn is produced in the eastern Dakotas and Minnesota, it did not see a lot of excessive heat. Yes, we did get up into the upper 90s to over 100 in eastern North Dakota and northwest Minnesota, but that was over a day or two at the most, and that was it. So most of the time, the temperatures were not quite high enough to shut down corn development or cause an extreme reduction in the moisture profile. And this is the change in the soil moisture from the 1st of July to the middle of July. So on June 30th, the charts on the left is what the moisture profile looked like. Well, we had very good topsoil moisture in the northwestern corn belt. Even the subsoil moisture was not too bad, but it was getting a little dry out here in Montana and the western parts of the Dakotas. But eastern portions of the Dakotas and Minnesota, where corn is produced, really wasn't a problem. That was for the 1st of July. And when you look at July 14th, in those most important corn production areas that we were looking at before, there was a very definite dry down that occurred in eastern parts of South Dakota and some North Dakota locations. But look at the subsoil moisture profile in those same areas. Again, a fairly large part of that corn and soybean producing area still had favorable subsoil moisture by the time we got to the 15th of the month. In the second half of July, we did see a lot more drier bias conditions across parts of North Dakota and into Minnesota. Some areas were absolutely dry. You can see there were some dry pockets here in western Iowa, even northeastern Nebraska, and parts of northeastern South Dakota. So it definitely got drier in some of those areas, even got drier across Wisconsin. And I'm just isolating the areas that had little to no rain. Surrounding that was not much more than 5/10 of an inch or so. So it was a definitely drier 2 week period. The 14th through the 17th also had hotter temperatures that occurred. But again, I want you to notice where the 100-degree readings are. Those are mostly out there in central parts of South Dakota and western North Dakota, and not so much in corn and soybean producing areas. It did get hot and it was drier biased, but with the moisture profile still favorable on the 14th of June, as we go back here and look again, the subsoil was still okay, and it was in the following 2 weeks that we had the driest and the warmest conditions. Well, the soil moisture on the 14th again is shown here. You can see that subsoil moisture. But when we got to the end of July on the 28th, you can see that we did finally get the subsoil to dry down a lot. So the bottom line here is that it wasn't until the last week in July that we really induced enough stress to crops that there might have been pressure on yield potential. Well, then there's the forecast that came in. Now, this forecast chart you're about to look at will be from a couple days ago, but I just wanted to point out to you a little bit about that. But before I go there, I want you to notice the low temperatures at night. Now, we use this as a gauge too on yield potentials. In the first half of July, there were only 2 days in which the morning lows were solidly in the 70s in that time period. And in the July 14th through the 28th period, there were only 5 days in which the morning lows were solidly in the 70s. And you can see that the lowest temperatures were 50s and 60s, which means that the crops had time to take breaks from the persistent hot weather. So the nighttime temperatures was not much of a factor. Subsoil moisture wasn't a big factor until the last week of July. And then there was this forecast map that came out. I believe this was on Monday afternoon, and you can see that it was bringing in some significant moisture to some of that area that we've been looking at. And meaning that, maybe a week to week and a half of notably stressful conditions occurred in this region or would have before it rained again. And so this puts a limit on how intense the dryness was going to be on corn and soybeans. Now, while I'm making all those statements, I want to make sure that you are aware that dryness in the central and southwestern Saskatchewan, I'm sorry, central and southwestern parts of the prairies, Montana, and the western Dakotas was rather significant, and it was hot multiple times. And it's this area that has the biggest problem with losses in yield potential for spring wheat and canola and other crops. Yes, there has been some impact on the upper Midwest or the northwestern part of the Corn Belt, but I don't believe it lasted long enough. And if this rain event is going to verify tonight into tomorrow, then we're going to at least get a temporary reprieve. Okay, we're going to skip through those because the temperatures have updated since then. We'll look at that in a minute. These are just some of my conclusions on this study. I'm going to let you stop the video and look at that, and I'm going to move on because we don't have a lot of time. So the month of August, this is the forecast for August that I threw into this slideshow. And I want you to point out, or notice here, I want to point out to you that precipitation in August is not likely to deviate much further than what we already saw in the past 30 days. There's going to be near to above normal precipitation in the Midwest, really from the Mississippi River Valley eastward. We're going to see near to below normal precipitation in the northwestern Corn Belt, and we're going to see even drier conditions from Montana up into parts of western Canada. It's still going to be drier bias in the southern plains and parts of the lower delta as well. And most of the warmer bias and temperatures are going to be out over the Rocky Mountains and the northwest plains into southwestern Canada's prairies. Pretty much the same as what we saw in July. So you should be able to come to the conclusion fairly quickly as to what we're trying to imply here, that the amount of crop loss in the northwestern Corn Belt may be limited. Now, before we move on, let's take a look at the latest data. And this is the past weather here for the last 24 or last 7 days. Just want you to notice where it rained and where it didn't rain. There was a lot of dryness. We already kind of looked at that a little bit. This is the latest drought monitor from came out this morning. Just noticing the fact that we still have a lot of drought that's prevalent out across parts of the upper Midwest and portions of certainly the northwestern plains, I should say, and into the Rocky Mountains. We have a lot of sugar beet and dry bean country in Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Idaho that certainly are quite drought stressed, but a lot of that cropland is irrigated and they're doing okay. The Midwest has got very little drought in it, except in the uppermost parts of the region. And this is the latest soil assessment that was done yesterday. And you can see that that area we've been watching definitely has a dry issue at the moment. And so, again, like I said, about a week to a week and a half of rather serious stress has occurred in some of this area. Now, the temperatures haven't been quite as hot as they were over this past weekend, but they were still quite warm. We aren't going to worry about Mexico right now, but they need some better rains. The moisture profile there is okay for what it is this time of the year. The past 7 days, precipitation was fairly limited. The coming 7 days is going to see greater rains out here in the western part of Mexico, but northeastern Mexico, as well as the southern U.S. plains, not likely to do very well with precipitation. So that'll that'll need to be continued to be watched. These are departure from normal precipitation over the coming 7 days. The blues are all above normal, and the browns are below normal. But anyway, now we're just going to real quickly run through this series of maps here. These are 24-hour rain totals. This is our event that's going to occur tonight, and it is very important that it verifies because this is the driest area, the area that's losing yield potential today because it's too dry. If we can get 1 to 2 inches of rain over all of this region, that's going to be really helpful. It will ease up the stress. It's not going to reverse the moisture deficits very much, but it will offer some short-term improvement. As time goes along, that system moves off to the south and east. It goes across the Midwest. Behind it is relatively dry conditions. There will be a frontal system Sunday night into Monday in the upper Midwest that brings yet another opportunity for some showers in the Red River Basin area of the north. But all the while, there's not much precipitation occurring out here in the northwestern Corn Belt, I'm sorry, northwestern plains and the prairies, and that's very important to watch as well. By Tuesday, the frontal boundary, moving through Red River Basin area, picks up a little bit more moisture and moves off to the southeast. There's a little bit of a new disturbance, which is questionable. This event may not verify. But the models had that on there this morning. I believe the midday has reduced that already. But that would be a nice follow-up system if it were to occur. And that moves off to the southeast. And yet there's another system that brings some additional moisture to the northern parts of the northwestern parts of the Corn Belt as we get out towards the 9th and 10th of August and the 11th. So this is why the marketplace has reacted to the situation in the northwestern Corn Belt. Okay, the bottom line is it hasn't been hot enough for a dry enough period of time to seriously hurt the production. And if all this rain, this timely rain occurs, then there's very little reason to expect a huge problem. Yes, there's going to be losses, and yes, they will be more significant in a few counties than others, but it doesn't strike me as being a widespread serious problem. First 5 days, temperature is going to be fairly warm, but then that cool air mass from Canada drops in, so temperatures in the 6 to 10 day period are going to actually be a little bit milder than usual. And then after that, we'll start heating up again. It is during this after period that I'm most interested in. I think mid to late August, we'll see more warmth and dryness out here in the northern plains and northwestern Corn Belt and Canada's prairies. And I do think that this needs to be closely monitored because I think only temporary improvement is going to occur. So we'll just stop everything right there. The last thing I want to do is just real quickly run through the rest of the world. There's nothing really all that new out there. Actually, let's do this. I did want to kind of point out the rainfall coming up over the 10 days. We're just going to look at 10 days here. Still drier biased in parts of Europe. Now, the European model is a lot wetter for France and Germany today than this GFS or the GFS family of models. And I'm going to stick with this. I don't think I'm ready to buy into the European wetter solution. But I also wanted to point out the dryness that's in southeastern Europe, including Ukraine, as well as most of the Balkan countries. It's not a really good environment for preserving soil moisture. We will see a steady decline in the moisture profile there. And while we're talking about that moisture profile, let's go take a look at those temperature departures from normal over the 10-day period. We do start off with quite a bit of a heat bias here in central and southeastern parts of Europe. It does abate in the second week of the outlook to some degree. But nonetheless, this dryness needs to be closely monitored. And in Asia, it's still a story here of frequent rains across a big part of Russia. I'm still a little concerned about the wet bias here that's been ongoing for weeks in parts of the new lands. You can see the drier tendency in Ukraine and Russia's southern region. I do not think this will be a festering problem of big proportions, but it still needs to be closely monitored. They will definitely dry down for a while. Notice that India and China get plenty of moisture. There really isn't any reason to be too terribly concerned about India's main production areas. The south is still dry. Just saw a report today that India is declaring a 14% moisture deficit for the monsoon season to date. But I will tell you that the soil moisture profile in India is looking fairly good, except in this far south. And as long as the soil moisture looks good, the production potentials are going to be good as well. And Australia, the forecast hasn't changed much. We're still looking at that drier tendency in eastern parts of the country, timely rain in Western Australia and across the far south. And in South America, we still have lots of moisture still coming into southern Brazil and eastern Argentina, classic El Nino environment here. And lastly would be Southeast Asia, and you can see the dryness in Indonesia still prevailing, but the rest of Southeast Asia does fairly well. This is meteorologist Drew Lerner.